Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston, I'm your host. I'm back today and we're recording on quite a sunny afternoon, a Monday afternoon, after Manchester United defeated Leeds 2-0 at Ellen Road on the Sunday. And I'm joined by my two colleagues, Samuel Luckhurst and Rich Fay. Samuel, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Stephen. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you very much. I'm doing quite good. Had a few drinks at the weekend while obviously you were busy at Ellen Road and Rich was at Lee and he missed out on Will Ferrell. Am I correct in saying that, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite the sort of A-lister, sort of a celebrity guest list at Lee Sports Village, but it was just quite as hot a game, really. United were good, actually, at the 21s. They did win. I think they've won 6 in a row in all competitions now. So would maybe urge any listeners to get to Lee if they can on the weekends to watch United, because these games are rarely on TV, but you might see a glimpse of a first-teamer in the years to come. Amari Forson got a hat-trick as well, so maybe one for fans to watch out for.
Well, you missed Will Ferrell and you didn't get to spend time with him on Saturday, on Sunday, but you can spend time with me now, can't you, Rich? So an exciting half an hour ahead for you.
Yeah, well, you're like Ron Burgundy yourself, aren't you? So there's a lot of similarities here. Our own anchorman on the podcast. So maybe I'm the real winner.
We'll just get straight into the analysis then, Samuel. You were at Ellen Road on Sunday. A hostile atmosphere was expected. That's exactly what we got in the game. Obviously, it was the second game in the week against Leeds in that kind of double-header fixture. I think it's fair to say it was a scrappy game. It lacked quality for large portions, but Ten Hag made multiple changes, didn't he? Rashford came in the striker into the second half. Garnacho came on, so did Alejandro Martinez. And is it a fair assessment to say the changes probably won the game in the end?
They did, and the Martinez change I thought was very underrated. In the it's not so much the statistical side of how many passes he's completed. You can always skew a stat, but it's his presence. He lifts teammates around him, and unfortunately for Harry Maguire, he doesn't have that aura, and he doesn't command that level of respect. He lost a lot of support from some players last season. He lost a lot of support from the fan base as well. So having Martinez there did wonders for United. Even though of course Garnacho came on, did brilliantly, took his goal superbly, 3 perfect touches. The more you look at the goal, the more difficult it is. He made it look extremely easy, but the 3 goals he scored this season have all been superbly taken. And I going back to the Martinez change and not starting him, I could understand what Ten Hag was doing with that element of rotation, and that sure, it seems will play at centre half against Barcelona, and Malacia will play at left back because Martinez is suspended. So it's a case of getting those two up to speed. But you are still depriving yourself of not only your best defender probably, but one of your best attackers, because those line breaking passes that Martinez can play do wonders for accelerating United's attacks, and they take opponents out of the game. And they didn't have that. They were too dilatory in their passing for probably an hour, I would say. The 2 midfielders were really poor. The amount of times Ten Hag was actually shouting or beckoning them over for a quick conflab, I lost count of with Sabitzer and Fred. But clearly those two did perform a little bit more and did improve with Martinez on the pitch. I still can't quite understand how Fred got man of the match, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have a wildly contrasting opinion to the co-commentator who was on duty for Sky yesterday. And to tell the truth, I think it was difficult to see where a goal was going to come from, but Shaw was back in his optimum position. The Rashford, it's a relocation, but it's almost becoming a reinvention, him as a centre forward. Again, a marvellous header, well out of the reach of MiR, and again it just underlines his development, his improvement this season. I think before the World Cup, when the season was paused, all but one of his goals came from the left wing. His last 3 goals have come as a centre forward. That is just a reflection of what great form, what world class form he's in at the moment. Nobody can dispute that. It's career best form, and we've been saying that for weeks. But the way they're going about it now, in that it seems like he's adding a new string to his bow on a weekly basis at the moment, and I think that that ceiling is still quite high, and there's still a way to go there. So for United, that bodes very, very well indeed.
Rich, if I said Marcus Rashford's now scored 9 headed goals in his career, how many of them do you think have come this season?
Well, I did see this stat, so
Oh,
it's probably a bad one. But I'll say, let's say, I'll say just for the sake of it, I don't know, Stephen, how many has he scored this season?
Well, Richard, it's 4. I can inform you it's 4
4,
after the weekend.
wow. Well, Samuel did just do the Andre Arshavin at Anfield celebration then, which sort of gave us an indication
I went 3.
well.
I thought it was... I
did
thought
you?
It was
I thought
3.
you had the 4.
So I've
I thought you
clearly...
had the 4.
I've skipped one. So 2 against Leeds, 1 against West Ham.
Sheriff, I think, as well, in the Europa League.
Oh, Christ. Do you know what? I cannot even remember.
Yeah.
I cannot even remember that.
Well, anyways, Rich,
Speaks
wider
volumes.
conversation, the wider point, Sam just touched upon it. He is scoring these strikers' goals, isn't he? And he's looking prolific and clinical in the box, whereas in the past seasons, he's probably not been up to it. So we've talked about his kind of relocation and how successful it's been, and we talked about this ahead of the weekend. Is that the choice for the rest of the season? Could you see that happening more often? Because we've talked about Weghorst, the advantages and disadvantages of having him in the team, and whenever it seems Rashford gets moved to striker, United just look better at the moment, don't they? I think that's just the fact of it.
Yeah, like you said there, I'd almost cut out that middleman of starting him elsewhere and repurposing him, because he might not want to be this striker long term. He might prefer playing on the left. We say he's better on the left, but the fact is at the moment he is so deadly through the middle. So I don't understand why you wouldn't capitalise on that, really. And when he's in this form and he's got this confidence, he's going to feel he can score against anyone. And of course, the caveat of that before was that he tended to be at his best on the left because he likes running at defenders, cutting inside on his dominant foot. He's a great dribbler. He's direct. He's got pace as well and power. But now he's playing like a centre forward. He's scoring ugly goals. He's scoring great headers as well. But you look at the goals he scored, in recent weeks. There's been ones where he's just been stood in between the posts, and he rarely used to do that. He is just playing as an actual number 9 now, and that's something that United have missed all season. I mean, in the first weeks of the season, there was this common theme of if United had, I think people used to say, if United had Ronaldo on the pitch, or they had someone playing between the posts, they'd be scoring all these goals because there was great delivery into the box, but there's no one there to capitalise on it. And I think that now they've got that, and for me, Rashford is the informed player, he's scoring all the goals. Why do you not play him through the middle? Sure, he might not be the long-term answer there. You still want to sign someone who is elite in the summer, but until then, this sort of bridge season, as we're calling it, one of transition, I think until then it sort of is apt that Rashford is a short-term fix up front as well. Of course, Ten Hag said himself, though, that when Marshall is fit, obviously he can't be relied upon. He does prefer to play him there. He thinks they play their best football. That should be the blueprint, really, going forward. You have Rashford on the left, you maybe have Sancho or Anthony on the right, and then you've got someone else who plays through the middle. So, yeah, long term, I don't think Rashford is the striker, but for now, it seems pointless to not play him there because he's playing so well, and like Sam said, scoring these goals that are proper sort of striker goals now. It's so refreshing to see, and yeah, long may it continue.
The only thing that could be improved is the celebration when he does that off his head. I mean, he should do the Shira, shouldn't he, and just hold his hand straight up. That'd be fantastic to see if Marcus Rashford did that. If we look at the other goals,
it'd be good if he did that at Wembley next week, wouldn't it?
I knew that was coming. I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
If we look at the other goal scorer, Samuel Garnacho, he took a bit of slack recently. Garnacho, there was a lot of talk on social media about him. He is, of course, only 18. Ten Hag talked about him in his press conferences, kind of defended him, but said, look, he still needs to learn, he's developing, etc. So his goal was beautifully taken, as you said. What have you thought of Ten Hag's management over him, with him over the last week? And patience is just going to be required with him, isn't it? Because he does feel like he has something special.
Ten Hag's management in general this season has been very good, and certainly in the case of Garnacho, there was nothing wrong with it whatsoever. In terms of like some people on Twitter like defending him just because he missed a couple of chances, what Ten Hag said was right. If you're playing at the level of Man United and you're missing those chances, you do deserve criticism. He had to take at least one of them. Ten Hag said that himself as well. He's not expecting him to score every chance, but those 2 chances in the draw were glaring, and they came at a very important point as well. United were 1-0 down. It's the first half. I felt if they got an equaliser, they probably would have won the game. So that's why you've got to really scrutinise those those opportunities. And I think us members of the press deserve credit as well. We ask Ten Hag these questions, he gives these public pep talks, and then these players improve it. It happened with Anthony a couple of weeks ago.
Samuel
I'm not
is
expecting
responsible
any
for Garnacho's goal.
Yeah, I'm not expecting to. I know I'm not expecting any credit whatsoever from the Twitterati at all. But it does at least, press. That's one of the purposes of press conferences. You want to ask questions on behalf of supporters or something that interests yourself, and Garnacho was a talking point after the Leeds game, and that press conference was held it was at 12 o'clock the next day, so it was a quick turnaround. But already Ten Hag had considered Garnacho's performance, the fact that he came off after an hour. He said yesterday that he spoke to him in between the games, which you'd expect him to as well, especially as Garnacho was one of the players who dropped out of the team. But the response was terrific, and as I said, the way he took his goal was exceptional. Just every touch was perfect. At the time, it looked an easier chance than it was, but it really wasn't. And MiR did get a hand to it, but it was such a precisely taken goal, and a lot of players would have gone for the far post, but I think that wasn't quite on because it might have been Ayling who's across. He probably blocked the angle there, but there was still a bit of deception about the way he just used those snake hips of his, and that probably caught out MiR a little bit. It's MiR has been culpable for a lot of goals that Leeds have conceded in the Premier League, but I wouldn't have necessarily pinned that one on him, and it capped a good end to an interesting week for Garnacho. He has to go through assessments like that where there are going to be lows as well as the highs. As you say, it is difficult to. Sorry, not difficult. It's easy to forget that he is 18 and a teenager, and I think of how I was at 18 and how immature anyone can be at 18, but you still do need people around you that are going to rein you in, and one of the things he does need to rein in is the Instagramming and some messages that looked quite cryptic at times, and that's not going to do him any favours, and Ten Hag is going to give that kind of stuff short shrift as well. But as long as you're performing on the pitch, you get a pass, and Garnacho, he's had a terrific season so far. Ten Hag only said the other day before the Leeds home game that he didn't think anyone at the club expected him to develop as quickly as he has done, and as we've said many times, 2022 was an annus mirabilis for him. It was remarkable, all of the things he achieved in one calendar year, and it's been a different last few months since the season resumed after the World Cup, and he's not quite had the momentum. You think back to that first game against Burnley when the season restarted, and I think he lost his footing when there was a good chance. He didn't really show up that evening, but when we watched him in training in Cadiz, he was exceptional, and you thought, well, I mean, we've seen it enough anyway in games, but when you see it in that intimate setting of a training environment, and at one point it felt like David De Gea and Maxi Oyedele had him covered, and he just went the other way, and he still put the ball past De Gea and scored. So he's an exciting talent to watch. There's a hell of a lot more to come, and the only thing that United really need to get sorted is his contract.
What was an 18-year-old Samuel Luckhurst up to then? What were you doing, Samuel? What were your hobbies?
He was not focusing as much on his school, on his A levels ahead of university, and then he was not particularly switched on at university either. So
not making TikToks.
We all make mistakes, definitely.
TikTok wasn't about.
No, it was MySpace, and it was MySpace in those days. Crikey.
Cryptic MySpace updates.
That's how old I was.
Cryptic MySpace.
Yeah.
Rich, if we talk about the midfield, it was the same midfield that played at Old Trafford last week. Obviously, with injuries, Fred, Sabitzer, and Fernandes. Obviously, Sabitzer's had a few appearances now, signed for the club on deadline day. So, what has been your assessment of him in the last few weeks? Because we've saw a bit more of him. I'm starting to feel like we're starting to get a bit of a handle on him now as a player.
Yeah, I mean, there's the mitigation that he's arrived at United at a time of midfield shortage, and he's had to play alongside Fred in midfield, and they're both players who like and are better in the sort of advanced role. So there's been a bit of awkwardness at times. They've both been sloppy in both appearances as well, and they've done good things, they've done bad things. It's been hard to sort of get a true impression of Sabitzer so far, but I do think that he's had a couple of glimpses of really good stuff. I thought for the Rashford goal in midweek, he played a really important pass in the build up to that. He did the same for the Rashford goal at the weekend as well, where he sort of drags the play forward and he sprays the pass to Luke Shaw for the assist as well on that one. But there were still a few clunky moments as well, and I think in Sabitzer's case, you got to remember the mitigation that he's coming here as a January signing when United have been desperate and there weren't many options they could actually go and actively get. So you always need to sort of ease expectations of how good he can be, if he's someone who could be suitable to the side in the long term, as well as something that will have to be looked again at the end of the summer. Of course, there is no sort of option to make this permanent at this moment in time. So, I think it'll be, the real test will be when Casemiro comes back in and we can see that midfield. I'm really intrigued to see a midfield of Casemiro, Sabitzer and Fernandes together. The first time we have a chance of seeing that will be in the Barcelona second leg and then possibly the Carabao Cup final as well. It's going to be really interesting to see just what Ten Hag makes of them as a trio, because like we say, we've got just over a week for that to finally be unleashed as a prospect, really, and he might still think that's not quite right as the midfield balance, but I think Sabitzer's shown enough. There's some promise there, and like I said, even though he's been clunky, he's looked a bit loose in possession at times, you've got to remember that he is playing alongside Fred. He's not playing in the role he prefers. He said when he was at Leipzig that he just always has this urge to push forward, to attack and to just run at goal himself, so he's probably had to rein that in a little bit and adopt a more defensive approach than he normally would have liked to. But I think it's encouraging, and like I said, considering the circumstance of his arrival, the circumstance of the games he's played and who he's played alongside, I think there is reason to be positive. He might not be the long-term answer, but if he's the short-term one, that's all that matters, really.
So if there's reason to be positive with Sabitzer, Rich, is there reason to be positive with a title challenge? Now, I'm not going to ask Samuel this because he shot us down ahead of the weekend and he's quite pessimistic.
I would do again.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to ask Rich for his verdict. Would you agree with Samuel's pessimism? Because they're 5 points behind Arsenal, who of course have 2 games in hand. They still need to play Manchester City twice. Look, I'm not saying they're in it or they've got a very strong chance, but stranger things have happened. Would you agree with that, Rich?
Well, I did send a message to Liam Corliss last week saying I wonder what the odds are on United finishing above Arsenal this season, because it's maybe not the biggest turnaround in points you'd expect, but you've got to move yourself from the giddiness, I suppose, after wins. I think United are still best of the rest. I think there's still a real gulf in quality between them and the other 2 teams. I think United are more reliant on their sort of core of key players as well, and any team would miss players like Casemiro and Martinez and Varane, but I think United's drop-off in quality is more extreme than the other 2 sides who are currently leading the way in the Premier League. I'd also say that United have made a real good habit of grinding out gritty wins this season. There's been loads of games that you can say, well, last season they don't win that. There's been countless examples, and they won by the odd goal. They won by 2 goals, of course, at the weekend. But if Leeds were more lethal in the first half, they could have gone ahead if Somerville was maybe more up to it, and you question if United come back in that game sometimes. But I do feel that there's been lots of moments as well on the contrary where United have got away with it. I think Fulham away, one example watching that, where Fulham were all over them in the second half. United were very good to get the winning goal, but they could easily have dropped points there. West Ham at home could easily have been dropped points as well. I think there could be a couple of occasions between now and the end of the season where that does catch up to them a little bit. And we looked at these 2 Leeds fixtures as an easy 6 points. They've taken 4, which is still good, but maybe Leeds and maybe City and Arsenal do take 6 from those 2 games. So I think it will just catch up with United. I think they are still firm favourites to get 3rd in the table. You'd back them in lots of the big games. It'd be interesting to see how they get on against Barcelona. But for me, a title challenge isn't on the cards, and it shouldn't be. That's unfair to label them as that because they're so early in this rebuild under Ten Hag that next season there's a real reason to be optimistic for it, but this is just a platform of a season. It's one to build foundations and then go ahead next season. But for me, no, title talk is too premature.
Now Samuel's got his bag packed for, is it Wednesday you're flying out, Samuel? from Manchester to Barcelona?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, so you get your flip-flops back, your sunglasses, your
if they do, if they do put Frenkie de Jong up, we're at least in place to speak to him, but I highly doubt that will be the case.
Obviously, that game is on the Thursday night at the new camp. So what changes do you think we could expect, Samuel? In the centre of defence, it seems likely that we'll have Luke Shaw and Varane, doesn't it? And obviously, we've talked about Rashford at length on this podcast. Going to striker, would it be time to do that on Thursday, do you think?
I certainly think that they've got to consider it in terms of having maybe more fluid front three there to go up against Barcelona. Sabitzer suspended as well, so I think
good shout.
I think that team, apart from up top, maybe one or two positions, it does largely pick itself. I suppose there may be a case for Wan-Bissaka to come in, but I did think that Dalot coming off after an hour, although Ten Hag is quite punctual in protecting players and particularly players who've just come back from injury. I did sense that maybe that was a hint that Dalot might start in Barcelona, and let's face it, as well as Wan-Bissaka's done recently, Dalot has had a better season and has become a better player under Ten Hag, and Ten Hag I think does prefer him as a right back. And he might be better suited to taking on Barcelona as well, but other than those areas, it's just really a case of, do you take Weghorst out of the team and maybe put Garnacho in? But I still think that, I'm prompted yesterday, Ten Hag credited Weghorst for his role in the first goal, saying about the run he made to the front post, and he seemed to think that accounted for Rashford being unmarked. I think that was maybe forcing it a little bit. I thought Weghorst was pretty poor by and large, even though he did do well for Garnacho's goal, and strangely he seemed to be more effective as a number 10, which I can't really see him occupying that role on a long-term basis. But it was innovative of Ten Hag to try that, and I thought United were worse at Ellen Road than they were at Old Trafford against Leeds, and there was a lot of self-doubt even in Ten Hag's game management, the way they shapeshifted in formation at times. At one point it looked like they were 4-2-4 until he happened upon something that he was quite content with, and it just seemed like United, when they took the emotion out of the game, that's when the chances came. And if you look back at the first goal, the build up to it, it's just about being composed on the ball, being proactive, and everyone hitting their right cues. Whenever they tried to play up to the emotion of the occasion, I think they came unstuck. Leeds thrive on that. That's what they're all about. That's what they've been about for as long as I've watched them. And sometimes, depending on the occasion, you've got to either go with the emotion or try and extract it from the game. And Liverpool at home this season, United used it to their benefit, but I thought at Leeds they were never really going to get very far with it. So Barcelona is very different in that it's obviously against the best team in Spain. It's a number of levels up from Leeds. It doesn't really strike me as a game, because it's so early on in the knockout stage of the competition, that there's going to be any real soul-stirring aspect about it, even though it is United going back to Barcelona, which is everybody knows what that city is synonymous with from a United angle. But I just see it as really a game that they've got to try and express themselves, not be cowed by Barcelona. Certainly when they last went to Spain and played Sociedad, there were too many changes to the team, and they won, but they didn't win by enough goals, which is why they came runners up, and they didn't really create many chances other than the Garnacho one, I don't think. I'm not sure they had another attempt on target all night, and they ended it with Harry Maguire going up front. So I think they need to be more expansive than they were in their last Europa League game, albeit they're coming up against a much better team, and it's just from a purist perspective, it's going to be brilliant to watch Pedri, Gavi and De Jong potentially all in the same starting lineup in the flesh.
It is a treat for Europa League fixture now. Barcelona are 11 points clear of Real Madrid, Rich. I would argue La Liga is not exactly the best standard it has been this season, but nonetheless still very impressive to be obviously that amount clear at the top. So what are you expecting over the two legs really? Xavi's obviously improved them. I think defensively they've made really good headway over the last few months. Stegen's kind of came back to form. He's one of the best goalkeepers in Europe at the moment. So I think the bookmakers have made Barcelona favourites to progress. So what do you think really over the next two legs? Because obviously we have said it's going to be a cracking game, but it is going to be very tight and very tough.
Yeah, I mean, Barcelona are by far the best team in Spain this season, but over the last 3 seasons, United have lost to Seville, Villarreal and Sociedad as well. So maybe there needs to be more respect for those teams who are in the chase of the pack in Spain as well. I know that often Spanish sort of people in Spain often get quite offended when you say it's a two-team league, and we've seen United lose to Atletico Madrid as well, haven't we? So maybe they can complete this clean sweep and lose to Barcelona as well. It's going to be tricky. It's a really, really tough test, but United have been at their best against the top teams this season. Like we said, they've beaten Liverpool, they've beaten Arsenal, they've beaten City, they've beaten Tottenham. So they've got to have a chance, and Barcelona maybe have more of the luxury in that they can afford to go full strength with both legs because they've got that cushion in the league, whereas United don't have that luxury. And of course, they've got a cup final as well next weekend, a week on Sunday, haven't they, to cater for as well. So I think that United will give a good account for themselves. I don't think it's going to be a game in which United are completely defeated and blown away by Barcelona, but I think it could just be a tie in which Barcelona's overall quality and the fact they've got so maybe more squad players available in United should ring true. But of course, Barcelona do actually have some injuries of their own as well. So it might just be a case of whoever's squad depth is able to cope with that better. And it's hard to say. It's hard to say how United will approach it tactically as well, because as Samuel said, Luke Shaw centre back. Typically, I mean, was it last time United played Barcelona in the Champions League? Luke Shaw played centre back, scored an own goal, from what I seem to remember.
It was in a back three, the home leg.
Yeah, back three. That's what Solskjaer would do. Ten Hag's very different to that. He can still go counter-attack football. And United, we saw against City, United played counter-attack football, but they didn't change their personnel and their formation to do so. And I think it'll be similar again. I think you can almost predict who the starting 11 will be, but United will just have to be more wary of how they play out of possession. I think it's a perfect sort of opportunity to play Rashford as a false nine or something if you have to. I don't really see the logic in playing Weghorst against Barcelona. I think United need to have someone who's fluid through the middle, who can help with the defensive aspects of the game maybe a bit more, who can drop into the hole and can play it out wide. But I think United will have a good go and a good chance of getting through. But yeah, Barcelona are favourites. But I think that'll suit United as well, because to a degree it will be somewhat of a free hit. No one's going to get too upset if they get knocked out of the Champions League at the playoff round by Barcelona. Yes, it's not what you aim to do at the start of the season, but as long as United get the top four and can win a trophy this season, I think it's one of success, and the Europa League is just a bonus really on top of that.
I'm sure Casemiro is going to be relishing the test anyways. He's had some fantastic games against Barcelona, hasn't he, over the years, of course, for Madrid. If we move on now then to a bit of takeover chat, Samuel, you wrote the line today that Avram and Joe Glazer are considering or looking at buying out their siblings and their shares, and that sources have indicated that they might be reluctant sellers. So can you expand on that line really and just tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, Avram Glazer and Joel Glazer's names are listed in the programme. They're the co-chairmen. They were there when the takeover was completed in May 2005 with their brother Brian, who initially was a lot more present at Old Trafford and at United games in the first few years. He was at the first home game of the 05-06 season against, goodness me, I think it was a Hungarian team. But anyway, it was a Champions League qualifier. He was at the 2007 FA Cup final. He's kind of faded into the background. It's mainly been Avram and Joel who have been involved in the day-to-day running of United. People in Tampa say that Joel's main job is looking after United, if you can call it that. I certainly wouldn't, because he's not been in Manchester for nearly 4 years since they last played Barcelona at home. So maybe he'll actually come next week, given that it's a Super League game, isn't it? it just gives me chills still thinking about his statement in that email that was sent out before United withdrew 48 hours later. But they have been, and I use, it's not exactly a pun, but they have been more invested in the running of United than the other four siblings. But the other four siblings, Brian, Edward, Kevin, Darcy, they are all on the board of directors that's listed on the Investor Relations United website. I don't think Darcy Glazer Kasvitz, to give her full name, I don't think she's ever actually been to a competitive United game. She might have been to a friendly in America, but I'm pretty certain she's never been to a proper game. I think Edward Glazer was the first game of the season against Brighton. Kevin Glazer, he might have been to one. I think he's been to one United game. Certainly been accounted for at one United game, and that was a long, long time ago. So, Avram Glazer has actually spoken a lot for as far as the Glazers go in recent months, recent years, where he's been doorstepped a couple of times, and he's commented on United, and that's an indicator that there is some interest on his part in actually being a part of the club still. And when that statement was announced in November, they left all options open. It was about getting potentially some investment coming in. It was potentially a straight sale. It depends. There are so many variables that can come ahead of this soft deadline on Friday, February the 17th. So proposals will be submitted or have to be submitted by then. It's still so Jim Ratcliffe is still the only person who has publicly declared an interest in buying United, which I don't think is out of the ordinary. I think if anything, it's the better way to go about it is to keep things as private as possible, but things are always going to come out of it. Avram Glazer was in Dubai last week. He has got a cricket franchise that he owns in Dubai, and they had a final on Sunday, but you don't need an atlas or a globe to look to see how close Qatar is, and there's a possibility that the Qataris will get a minority stake. They cannot buy United outright because under the UEFA rules you can't have multi-ownership, and Qatar is synonymous, and they are the custodians of Paris Saint-Germain. So I hope that I hope United don't fall into the hands of Qataris anyway, because I've said about this chapter and verse, written about this chapter and verse, spoken about it. It's got to be owners who, Ratcliffe on paper looks ideal, but we've spoken about before just how unpalatable it would be for two clubs in Manchester to be owned by states. I don't care what Manchester City fans say about it. They could say I'm compromised by my title, what have you, but I find it quite unedifying how their supporters just look at the pure positives of look at what they've done for that area of Manchester. Did you see that area of Manchester before they took over it? And conveniently ignore that the brother of the owner once set a person alight in a desert, and there's footage of that. So although I'm digressing there, and it's not a laughing matter, but it's laughable the way certain City fans defend the regime and just see it as purely positive. You want United to fall into the hands of an owner or owners who have clean hands, and I'm not saying that it has to be an American or it has to be an English speaker whatsoever. We've seen bad American ownership. We've seen it at United. They have been bad owners. Everybody is in agreement that they shouldn't be the owners of United anymore, that it's better for United to be for the Glazers to end their occupation. But that decision is not in the hands of United supporters, unfortunately, and it's a decision that will be taken by the Glazer family, chiefly the two brothers who are the co-chairman, because they're the most involved in the running of the club. So look, it really wouldn't surprise me what happens from here. But in terms of with the two brothers looking at buying out the other siblings, that's something that's been kicking around for a while, and it's not exactly surprising given how comparatively hands-on Joel and Avram are compared to the other four, who you don't really see or hear anything of them. Darcy Glazer Kasvitz was once approached at Tampa Bay Buccaneers training about what was going on at United and how there was some supporter unrest back in 2019, and she just walked away from the interviewer. She's literally never uttered a word on United, whereas her 5 brothers, they've at least been in the stadium, or they've talked to someone who's an employee of Man United.
It was a Glazerception when you were listing off all the Glazer siblings earlier on. There's 6 of them, Samuel, in total. The Glazers.
Yes, so you've got Avram, Joel, Brian, Kevin, Edward, and Darcy. So they're the 6 that are on the board of directors, and there were some other names listed on there as well. Richard Arnold's on there, as he's the chief executive, of course, and a few other directors, I think.
I wonder what a Thanksgiving is like around the Glazers' house. I'll never know, unfortunately, but it'd been interesting to be a fly on the wall.
I'm not sure they all get together.
No,
yeah,
you might have to pay
exactly.
for your food on the door as well. It might be £5 tickets, or $10 tickets, or whatever in that scenario. Rachel, if we just end it there with a quick conversation, then expanding on that Qatar point that Samuel made. Me and you have both kind of wrote about that interest over the last week and the issues estate ownership would bring. It's important that they are brought out into the light and they're addressed on it, because as much as supporters want the Glazers to sell the club, and it's definitely the time for them to sell the club, it has to be to the right people, doesn't it?
Yeah, United are for sale. The soul of the club shouldn't be, in my opinion. I think that United have always sort of held themselves. They've always looked at other clubs like that sort of disparagingly and thought they are better than it. And I know Samuel said before as well that the Glazers are bad owners, but they aren't the worst owners in world football. They're not the worst owners out there, and it can't just be change for change's sake, in my opinion. But I think that something that is quite startling is that when you're on social media all day, as we are, there does seem to be a big demographic of supporters who do want change and who do want money of any sake. They want to see Mbappe in a United shirt. They want to see them playing in the Super League. They just want to see United at the top of the food chain in the transfer market and in terms of modern football. Really, they want to support a team who is synonymous with success again. There is a large portion of the supporter base who I believe do still want that, and I guess that's the difficulty, isn't it? You can't choose who owns a football club. The fit and proper tests aren't rigorous enough. They don't keep out the people who shouldn't be in charge of football clubs, and it's again the sort of morality of football. And whenever you go into these discussions, you end up getting into sort of heinous crime top trumps of saying, well, you can't like this and then like that, and you can't have these owners when this is happening. What about investment in this company, that company? It's just whataboutery that deflects from the actual issue at hand. And United in Qatar would be really unsavoury. It'd be really sour, and it would be it would taint the name of the club for forever. Really, they'd have that link. And yes, they've had all this good in the past, but they will have been seen as selling out to a sports washing regime. So I think that there's a real passionate demographic, a core sort of fan base who are dead against this and who will voice their opinions, but it's a sad state of modern football, really, that these things have become normalised. And like I said, there is still going to be a large proportion of the fan base who don't really see a problem with it. And of course, the issue is that when you raise these, like I said, it's the whataboutery. It's the fact that I wrote a piece last week and I got emails immediately into my inbox saying, accusing me of racism because I didn't believe a Qatari takeover of Manchester United was right.
It's
and
ridiculous.
I actually want to leak the email. Well, not leak the email, but I'm going to publish the email at some point, because some of the things that are pointed at are absolutely ridiculous. And it is just a sorry state, really, that so many people just don't see that, and they just see the success of a football team as the sort of the only thing that matters in all of this. And of course, every United fan wants United to be successful. They want United to be at the top of the food chain again. They want to be buying the best players. They want to be winning the Champions League. They want to be winning the Premier League. But I actually think there is some encouragement in the fact that United have been so badly run and they're still showing signs of progress under Ten Hag. I don't think United need to be selling themselves out to a sports washing regime and getting billions and billions in the bank. They've shown they can make money. Every year the revenues go up. Yes, the debt's going up, but if you just get an owner who has the right interests at heart and who wants to make United successful again, you can do that without having to sell out to Qatar or to a state. So I think there is, hopefully, in my own personal opinion, some sort of better resolution out there. But yeah, I think it does bring out maybe the worst of modern football when you get into the sort of the Qatar links and possible interest in the club.
It's absurd how people can write emails like that and read them back and send them. It's so strange.
It's an important.
People can get into that kind of headspace.
Yeah, it's an important point Rich makes there, because the perception is completely skewed by social media, and I'm not saying matchgoers deserve more rights or what have you, but matchgoers would be protesting against something like that. They're the ones who protested against the Super League. It is easier to take an opinion where it's aligned with your culture, and it is a cultural thing, but there's become, I suppose we can blame Jurgen Klopp for it inadvertently, but since Klopp came out with the quotes about City and Newcastle earlier in the season, what he said was completely fair, completely legitimate, but it's allowed those clubs to say, actually, he's being racist. He just doesn't like clubs being owned by Gulf states or something like that. And it's not. It's much more principled than that. And Klopp has shown and said things in the past that suggest that he's a principled bloke on various matters, whether it's Brexit or COVID. I don't think it really matters. You take him at face value. He's certainly not being racist. The thought that anyone can be racist because they say it might be bad if Manchester United are bought by a Qatari firm or a Qatari consortium is just preposterous. I don't want United falling into the hands of Qataris, because just look at what goes on there. Look at how oppressive it can be, and it would just be gaudy. And you look at Paris Saint-Germain, and whatever people say, no club should be aspiring to be like Paris Saint-Germain. Yes, they've got Messi, Mbappe, Neymar, and they've got a little FIFA team going on, and that's why they appeal to a certain demographic. But for a big portion of the fan base, it's not anything like that, and it shouldn't be like that. It's more about the principled nature of it. And like I was talking about American owners earlier. Wrexham have American owners. And
a Canadian.
You only have to look at their interviews. Sorry, and a Canadian. You only have to... North American owners.
Samuel will be getting some emails.
Hollywood owners. I know, Hollywood owners. And they have the interests at heart. You can tell that they're not being phonies. They're there at the coalface. They go to games. They interact with supporters. They're sitting in on the phone calls about budgets and salary caps and what have you. They're throwing themselves into it. That's what you want from an owner, and you want them to be reasonably clean. And Ryan Reynolds has certainly not done anything untoward as far as I can think of, but I'm sure someone out there will say, he said this in 2008 or 2006
if you don't
or
like
whenever.
Deadpool, if you're not a fan of Deadpool, then you might think so.
Precisely. So yeah, the whole whataboutery I've got absolutely no time for. And I mean, if those people are of the opinion that we're being racist, they can do one, really. I wish I could say something a bit sterner, but I can't.
No.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to how people consume the club, though, doesn't it, as well? Because if you don't go to games and you don't go to Old Trafford, then the only thing that maybe the takeover will mean to you is the players United buy. It will be how they do in the trophy. If you're only consuming them by just watching the matches on TV, I'm not saying you're any less of a fan, but for some fans, their interest will only be on what happens on the pitch and who United are buying, and if they're winning the transfer window, if they're winning the Premier League. So there's so many different cogs to it all, and it is really complicated in that regards to finding someone. And of course, there probably is no sort of perfect owner, because all big business will be tainted to some degree, and someone somewhere is probably getting exploited, and there's always going to be workers who are at the bottom of the food chain of all that. So it is really complex, but I think, like Samuel said, we've made our own opinions clear on where we stand on it.
Well, the MiR did a survey in, I think it was late December, and over 1,500 people answered, and it was the majority of overseas fans were more, wanted a kind of Gulf state to come in, whereas home-based supporters who live in Greater Manchester and around that area were more wanting searching Ratcliffe. So I think we've kind of saw that spill onto social media over the last few weeks, haven't we? And you can kind of see that divide bubbling under, and that was reflected in those survey results. But I think we'll end it there then, gents. Very good podcast, I must say, of course, with such a brilliant host. Rich, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Samuel, for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.
And a safe flight to Barcelona, Samuel. I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time. And thank you to the listeners.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Usual.
Thank you very much.
There you go, and take care, and head across the YouTube channel as usual. Thank you very much. Take care.